Welcome, innovative teachers, to another episode of our Mastermind series. We are talking with current teachers who are some of the best in STEM and technology education. And today we have a real treat. We're talking with Chelsey from the Hipster Art Teacher. And I was telling her before this, but I'm definitely fangirling over here. I was so excited to meet with you and chat with you today and have us on our podcast. So if you wouldn't mind, Chelsey, introduce yourself and tell us about your little teaching role and journey. Well, not little, but tell us about you.
Well, thank you so much, Naomi and Spencer, for having me. My name is Chelsey Odgers. I'm known better on Instagram as Hipster Art Teacher. I am a K-2 technology and STEAM teacher in New Jersey. I have an Etsy shop where I sell some of my own creations, like my teacher clipboards and things like that. And I also present about anchor charts and STEAM and STEM. So I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
That's awesome. And I love that you get to do K through 2, because I feel like even for me, I do K through 6 and Naomi does K through 5. And I feel like the toughest part for me for teaching is always the younger kids. So, I mean, I feel like a lot of people feel that way, especially when they're given like a wide variety of grades like that. So I'm really glad that we're able to chat with you today. So we're really excited. First question I kind of wrote down that I wanted to ask, because this is kind of like a big one for our audience, is what would be the one piece of advice you would give to teachers looking to kind of ramp up their teaching and become like innovative and using those different like STEM, technology components you use?
So I have only really been teaching STEAM and STEM for about like 3 years. My background is really in art, hence the Hipster Art Teacher. So actually I went to school to be an art teacher, but I was also a graphic design major, which is how I got into the STEAM STEM technology role. So I would say for me, even like when I first started STEAM and STEM, I was really just looking for ways of having my kids be creative, innovative, like you said. And so I think it's important to set up an environment for your kids that make them feel creative and excited and wanting to explore and build and tinker. So I think setting up your environment first is like super, super important. And then also just getting ideas online. Like I am constantly inspired by my fellow teachers on Instagram, on Pinterest, Facebook, YouTube. There are so many different resources out there for you. Take what others have done, of course, give them credit, but then also find a way to flip it and make it your own. And I think that's really the best way to come up with new ideas and share them with others so that they can also be inspired by you as well.
I love that you said that too, because I feel like a lot of times people are like, well, I'll just take exactly the idea I see and I'll put it in my room, but everyone in the room is different. So you kind of got to put your own spin on it. So and I love how you talk about the environment, because I feel like that's so important too.
And you know your kids, so you'll know too, like what spin you can put on it for them. You know, even living in different areas of the country, there's going to be different things that will work better for your kids that won't work with others. So
yeah, and I feel like it's so important to keep in mind. And I love how you talked about how, that environment, we have to set it up so it enables the kids to be creative, enables maybe them to fail a little bit, and that's okay. And we're going to fix it and try new things. And I feel like that's what creativity is all about. And I would have loved to have been in your room. I'm too
old
thank
you.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah. For this school year, how do you set up your room? Do you do stations? Do you do like a whole group? Do you kind of do robots all the time? How do you, I guess, in a typical school year, set up your room for innovation?
Yeah. So I am definitely like the queen of stations. I love a good station. So I have like a robot area, a building area. I have all these different, a spot for where technology lives, our iPads, our computers. So, and because I only have really 40 minutes with groups and I have 5 minutes in between, it's really hard to have the whole group doing robots all at the same time. And I've had moments where I've tried it and it just doesn't work. So I find it best where I have my kids, maybe some of my kids are working on the computer doing coding on code.org. And then I pull a smaller group of students that I'd be working with them with the robots. So I find that, the smaller groups is a lot easier to manage than trying to do everybody all at once. So that's the way that I do it.
I started doing stations like that. And like this year, obviously it looks like very different, but I love doing stations with the younger kids, and I think they love it. And it almost seems like too much fun for them, that they feel like they're almost not, learning anything. They're just playing. Like, oh, you're over here doing Legos. You're over here doing like, Ozobots. You're over here doing this. And then it's like, oh, we need to switch. And they just love it. It's so fast paced. And I think that complements instruction for the younger kids. And I mean, they're used to having their reading stations in their classroom and math. So, I mean, I feel like it complements it too. So I'm glad you use that because that makes me feel better because that's what I do too with them.
Yeah.
So.
I think there's like a lot of pressure to do these big, like crazy projects where they're like working on something for weeks. For me, it's not feasible because as a special area, like I only see them for 40 minutes and then I have 5 minutes in between. That's not enough time to break things down, to put things like stored for weeks at a time. It's too much. So for me, doing these smaller bite-sized lessons, bite-sized pieces works better. And then also with the stations, making sure that you just model for students what each station looks like before they go to it is like super important. As long as they know the expectations of those stations, then it works really well. And you can just send them and they know immediately, like, this is what I need to do here, So
do you have like certain like rules that you go over, like volume wise and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I have a little poster in my room. It's a little robot and like it's like a voice monitor and I move the little finger so they know like if it's supposed to be, quiet inside voices. What helps also is my classroom is not like I don't have walls. I'm part of the library. So library class is happening at the same time as my class. So as it is, they already know that they kind of have to be quieter than they would if we were just like in a room by ourselves. So that helps. But yeah, definitely like knowing that, if we're going to be using Legos, you will have to take them apart and put them away. So don't have your heart set on a project. But one thing that I do is I take pictures of what they've made so far or what they, how much they did. So that way they at least have some kind of record of what they made. They don't feel as bad taking it apart when it's time to leave. So
I like that too, because that gives them a little bit of ownership and pride. That's awesome. I love all that. I wrote a bunch of that down because I mean, me K through 2, that is like I'm saying, that's one thing like I'll admit to people like, I've been doing this for a while and I feel like I'm pretty good at it. But if I'm being honest, I feel like everyone can grow. And that's like my area is like K through 2. Like, so this right here is perfect. I love this.
Yeah.
Well, you have the best anchor charts too. Like you're so visual with your directions and what you do with the kids, which is so important no matter what, that especially those pre-readers, that you have such clear visual expectations that they can be successful. So you do a great job supporting that part of their literacy.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a very visual person, obviously, with my art background. So that's like always something that's really important to me. So,
yeah. Well, so with your transition from art and more STEAM and STEM, what have you seen as a result of that with the kids? Have you seen like a grow and change with their thinking, or is it similar or different?
What I love about STEAM and STEM, which is something that you don't see as much in an art classroom, is just the collaboration and community that the kids have with working with the robots, having them be in partner groups and like having to figure out and solve this problem together. Or when they work with their STEM bins and they're trying to build something and they're trying to, figure out how am I going to build this Eiffel Tower out of popsicle sticks, and just seeing the creativity and the collaboration and them working together is really nice. Because when you're in an art room, collaboration happens sometimes, but mostly it's you just focusing on your own thing. But the STEM, like working together and just seeing them have success together is really, really nice. So I love that.
And I feel like those skills that the kids are building too are so important. Like, I mean, that's not something that you're going to see in other subjects as much in a typical room. And like, I feel like those are things they're going to use forever,
Yeah. And the communication too. I think it's, great that they're talking about it together. They're figuring out solutions together. And, at the end, I try to take some time to debrief and talk about, okay, like what worked well, what did not work well, what would you do differently next time? And I think that's really important too, for them to think about, moving forward, how can we be better the next time?
I love that, because I feel like one thing that like as a society, people struggle with is like constructive feedback and looking at things and saying, well, we can improve really anything, but how do we go about that? And that's like such a big skill that kids need to learn.
Totally.
So when we're looking at like these different ways and different things that you're using, one of the questions that we get a lot, and I know you probably get this too, what is like the biggest challenge to using STEAM or STEM or whatever you want to call it in your room? What does that biggest challenge kind of look like for you?
For me, the number one thing is definitely time. I never have enough time. I always want more
Yep.
time. And if I could have more time, that would be wonderful. So managing my time, making sure that I'm staying within my time period and that I'm leaving time for cleanup. And I'm also leaving time at the beginning to go over directions. By the time I go over directions and they're actually working, it doesn't give them a ton of time. So that would be the one thing I would wish for, to have more time for them to actually build and do the actual activity. Also, just like I was mentioning earlier, storage of projects and just materials in general, finding a system that works and knowing what your kids are able to go and get on their own and things that you need to kind of lock up and have them ask permission to use. That's like a learning curve for sure. Like once you figure out those things, like what can be on their level that they can just go over and grab, and what, you know, is something that you need to kind of help them walk them through it. Those are definitely challenges. And also teachers who are not STEM and STEAM thinking or like-minded may come in your classroom and think that the kids are just playing, and they don't understand that there's so much learning happening, especially at the K-2 level. It does look a lot like play, especially when you're using Legos and popsicle sticks and things like that. So, you know, sometimes I think it's hard to justify your program, but you have to really know that what you're doing is important and your kids are learning a lot. There's so many skills that they're using in your classroom. So to just be confident in what you're doing and just know that you're making a difference, and your kids love your class for a reason, because it's exciting, engaging, and they're learning so much.
I love how passionate you're about it, because I know I feel the same way. Like, you're giving me chills right now. One thing though, I want to ask you, when you're talking about time, because that's like, when people ask me, I always say that too. I'm like, time, like there's not enough time in the day for every project. How do you kind of maximize your time, as far as like, is there certain like instructional strategies or certain visual things you do where you're like, this kind of increases that time for kids to work?
I would say that, like, I'll give you an example for the robots. I spend probably like 2 or 3 class periods leading up to them even touching a robot, talking about, this is how we hold a robot with 2 hands, like we're holding a steering wheel. We walk with walking feet. This is where you turn it on. This is where it goes when it's time to put it away. It has its parking spot. So those are all like important things, like going over those things first, modeling it for them, and then having them. So there may be a class period where they're not actually using the technology, or they're not actually building, but going over those key things with them to get them ready is going to really help them with success. And also display on your board, have a visual or words, if they are, you know, literate and are able to read them, of what you want them to do, what the expectations are, just so that they have something you can point to and say, if they forget, you know, midway through what they should be doing, or they want a reminder, it's there visually for them. I think that's really important too.
Oh, I love that you said that too. And I love that you spend so much time doing that. I even wrote down, because we have a little sheet, everyone kind of knows it, over to the side, and I put, I need to do this more classes covering. Because like sometimes I'll be like, you know, they'll figure it out. And there's a lot of joy in discovering things, but there's also like boundaries you need to set. And when you set those rules, I feel like it maximizes your time. So I'm glad you said that, because for me, I'm like, that hits home for me. Because sometimes when kids are like, hey, how do I use this? I'm like, we'll just see if you can figure it out. And sometimes that works. Sometimes that wastes a lot of time.
No, and I mean, there's definitely like a time and place for discovery and like just letting them do it, like for sure. But with the robots, because they're so expensive, I'm always like, no, like we will not touch these robots until we go over these things. It's so important. So.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. And I love that you use the robots as an example, because that's a really good example, I think, for something that needs to spend time on for sure. So that was awesome. I love that.
Definitely.
Well, and coming from being a classroom teacher, like, and I know we have a lot of classroom teachers that listen too, that those rules and routines are so important, and they apply to all classroom settings to help kids be successful. So if you want to just jump into it, just sometimes you have to slow down to go fast.
Yes.
True. Yep.
Yeah. So if someone was getting started, you mentioned people looking online, put their own spin on it. If someone was nervous getting started with anything STEM related, what would you suggest to them?
I would say, kind of like I said earlier too, setting up your classroom as an environment that's inviting, it's colorful, it's exciting. I think that is really, and getting those materials, just basic materials. It doesn't have to be the robots. When I first started, I didn't have robots. That was something that I was able to introduce later on. But using what you have and just allowing your kids to be creative. When I was little, and I would go to my grandma's house, she would just fill the table with like all these different art supplies and all these different things and clay and popsicle sticks and, you know, and I would just like make stuff out of it. It didn't have to be anything like a big crazy project. I would just make whatever came to mind. And I think giving our kids those opportunities to just be makers and tinker and experiment with maybe materials or tools they don't have at home. You know, depending on what environment they're coming from, they may have not ever used any of these art supplies or things before. So I think giving them those opportunities to even just play and discover, explore, I think those are all really important things. So I would say don't put a lot of pressure on yourself to do big crazy projects. As much as you see these like awesome things people are doing, you will get there. Take your time. And I have to take my own advice with that too, because I see things and I'm like, I really want to do this, but I know for my personal environment, it's not going to work. So I have to figure out a way to break it down into those bite-sized pieces where it will work for my students.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's always the toughest part, because like a lot of people, they see them and they want to do that. Whereas like sometimes it's like, we got to take a step back and maybe we can only do a portion of that project.
Right.
And I think that's what scares people out of using STEM and STEAM a lot. And we talked about this last week and a couple of weeks ago too. Just, I mean, that's, we're big advocates, all of us, you know, for getting people to use it, STEM and STEAM and everything in between, any way they can. So it's like, you know, just start small, I feel like is like the big key there for sure. So I'm glad you said that too, because I think sometimes Pinterest can be a little bit intimidating. It's nice, but it can be intimidating.
And I also think too, it's important as a teacher, you have to set the example for your students. So you need to be a creator, a tinkerer, a maker, and show your kids what you're making, what you're working on, what, you know, and if there's a program or something you don't know how to use, I guarantee you there's a YouTube video out there somewhere where someone is going to teach you really simply how to do it. So if there's a program or something that you're intimidated by, like when I first got the robots, I didn't necessarily know how to use them. So I had to go and do my research, and, you know, taking time yourself as a teacher to learn those things and play around yourself will really help your students and benefit them and you and the whole classroom environment.
I love that. So, kind of like our last question here, and I always like asking this one. What is one thing, if you could look back on old Chelsey the first year and, you know, and talk to her now, what is like one piece of advice you might give her when you're talking about doing, you know, all these awesome STEAM projects?
Oh gosh, what advice did I give myself? I think to slow things down, like we were talking about earlier. I have a tendency when I'm writing a lesson plan to jam pack it full, because I'm always afraid I'm not going to have enough to fill a period. But I'm always like, oh my God, I did not get to all these things because I just thought that I was just going to have so much extra time. So I think knowing that like things take longer than you think they're going to, and it's also okay to like veer off from the lesson plan and kind of see what happens in the moment, because the kids will start a discussion or start doing something that you weren't planning, but it ends up being awesome. And just let those moments happen, and, you know, let the moments happen. Just don't try and plan everything to the T, you know?
And I love that you said that, because I had a discussion with my principal the other day about that, just because she was in my room and a kid had a question. We were doing an egg drop and they were arguing about something different. And so I'm like, well, let's go out and test it. And we had like a testing center. So we went out and tested their theories. She's like, that's where like the real learning happens. When a kid asks a question, you value that question and then you kind of explore. And I think you hit the nail on the head there. And that's, I would go back and tell myself like, hey, it doesn't have to be structured for every 10 seconds that we have to say we're doing this. You know, sometimes there's questions being asked or things that come about that, you know, make us say, hey, we got to do this. So I love it. And
it's okay for us to fail if we want our students to know it's okay to fail. If your lesson plan is not going the way you thought it was and things just kind of go in a different direction, that's okay too. You know, we have to let our students know we make mistakes. We're not perfect, you know, and so I think that's really important too.
Yes, for sure.
Definitely. Well, it makes your lessons better. Like sometimes I'll ask them like, hey, what could I do better next time? I got to teach this 3 more times. What should I do with the other kids? And they're like, and they'll tell me. And so I tell the next one's like, hey guys, I got some advice for you from last class. And it helps. Like it totally, they see things that I definitely don't see. So they're great little guys. Well, thank you so much again for being with us, Chelsey. You're amazing. You're doing awesome things. Where can teachers find you after this episode and all the awesome stuff you're doing?
So the best place to find me and all my teacher things is on Instagram at Hipster Art Teacher. I have a YouTube, but I don't post a ton there. And my Etsy shop, of course, like I said, is where I kind of sell all my things that I make when I'm not teaching. So definitely check me out. And I love making new teacher friends. So I hope you can be teacher friends and join me on Instagram.
Oh yeah, we love Instagram, so that's awesome you said that. That's why I'm like, I need to go follow. I haven't been on Instagram. I've been so busy. I was like, I need to head over and follow you too.
Yes. Let's be Insta friends.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, thank you everybody for being a part of this series, and we can't wait for the next episodes in the future. Follow us on Instagram as well, Innovative Teacher Podcast, and we will chat with you guys soon.